Well, one number the world was hanging on today was another consumer number, and that was China's latest inflation rate. It shows prices are rising faster than expected for both businesses and also consumers. The producer price index, business inflation if you like, it was 8% higher than a year ago. That compared with forecasts of 7.8%. And the consumer price index was 2.1%. That was also higher than expected. So let's go to Hong Kong now and to Citi's head of Asia Pacific Economics. That's Li Gang Lu. Li Gang, always good to have you on the program. I just want to go to this. Is this really a surprise given the fact that much of China, its big cities, are locked down right now with COVID?
Yeah, a bit surprise to me because if you think people are on the lockdown, there's very little demand. So this number mainly reflected on the disruption of the supply chains. In addition, I think the rising oil price, food price may have contributed to the rising CPI numbers. But I think if you look at the overall activity in Q2 for the year, and China may enter into a very sluggish growth or even a negative growth in Q2. So I don't think inflation is a big headache for the policymakers. In fact, if you strip out food and energy, China's so-called core inflation remain rather flattish.
Okay, then take me back to even the economic forecast for China this year. 5.5% says the government. Now it seems as though the annual rate's back in the fours. As you say, there might be even a quarter of negative growth. I mean, where does this land? Because clearly the Chinese government has a vested interest to make certain that the economic growth rate comes in at that 5.5%.
Yeah, I think this 5.5% growth looks increasingly difficult to achieve unless in the second half they roll out major stimulus program. But from what we are observing, the government is still quite conservative. Other than pushing out a lot of infrastructure projects, we have not seen any new programs that are going to target on the consumption side of the economy. If we don't see any consumption coupon ideas to be rolled out, so indeed, it's very difficult to see a 5.5% growth. Our view is that given the very sluggish Q2 growth, China's growth for this whole year may fall around 4%.
Wow. Which is, of course, something that we're not used to, when we've seen sort of growth rates of between 6 and 10% over the past 10 years. So then another aspect of this, given the fact at some point we've seen this in most Western economies, most economies, when they've come out of lockdowns, severe lockdowns, they generally seem to almost have a relief rally, that the economies grow very quickly. I guess the problem with China at the moment is we don't quite know when the opening up of the economy, when the opening up of these severe lockdowns is going to come.
That's correct, Ross. I think, perhaps China's economy will start to rebound in June, given there's some discussions that the implementation of the content of China's COVID-0 policy could start to change. Even Shanghai has been locked down for over 6 weeks. You can see that 70% of Shanghai's industrial plants have started to resume production and resume work. So this is something, an improvement. If we were to see the lockdown to phase out in June, perhaps the recovery will start from June onward. Overall, we think that in the second half, we should see a very robust rebound in the Chinese economy.
And just very, very quickly, I just wanted to ask you, therefore, the impact, on the globe is obviously affected by China. That's the other thing. Everybody's waiting to see what happens in China, to see what happens in the rest of the world.
Indeed, some of the, port waiting data suggests that the supply chain has been affected now. To some extent, if those economies are heavily dependent on Chinese manufacturing products, perhaps your price could be affected by the lockdown. So indeed, to some extent, the disruption in the supply chains from China may have contributed somewhat to the global and persistent inflation in the Western world.
Ligang Lu from the head of economics for Asia Pacific for Citi in Hong Kong. Many thanks for your time.